three of the Alliance Guys. You can see our ugly mugs or handsome mugs, however you want to look at it. But we are the Alliance Guys podcast, and we are here live. But this is being taped. But you'll see it live, mostly unedited. But this is the Alliance Guys podcast, a presentation of alliance-wrestling.com, your number one source for news and information for the National Wrestling Alliance. I'm Jake Allen, joined with me, as always, the former NWA World Junior Heavyweight Champion, the modern-day hero, the champion of virtuosos and domestic tranquility. I am speaking none other of Kevin Douglas. And also, everyone's favorite bitter dude, Mr. DKM. DKM.
What up? I saw that, Kevin.
I'm just, what's the over and under how many times we're going to flip off the camera today?
Well, for me, it'll be 0.
Just
I'm
do
gonna
it.
I'm gonna go with a 5. I'm gonna go with 5.
All right. So this is the first for us, guys. We're trying something a little bit different. We're trying to do the podcast as a video simulcast. Over the last few weeks, you would see my mug on the camera, but you never got to see the modern day hero. You never got to see DKM, and now we're here to you live. And stop doing that flashy stuff. You're distracting me. We're here to talk a little NWA. We're going to talk some pro wrestling. We're going to talk wrestling, and well, did you guys check out the Paul Bosch Houston Library episode from last week that NWA Power put on? It was actually some pretty cool stuff. I watched a little bit of the commercials to start things off with. You had Paul Bosch in the library cooking sausage, not in the library, excuse me, in the kitchen. You had Dusty Rhodes talking about back pain medicine. I mean, these were the glory days of pro wrestling.
Well, personally, I caught a lot of it, mostly the wrestling part of it. And I was just floored with the quality of production. I think I tweeted about it. I mean, for the time period that it was in, that is some of the best preserved video quality I've seen of anything, even sans WWE's video quality during that time. DK?
Yeah, I saw it, and I really enjoyed it. And like Kevin said, it was very well produced. And the part that actually kind of surprises me is that it still exists, because so many people recorded over their shows. But I don't know if Bosch had the foresight or just was a collector, but he kept his stuff.
Well, just probably not sure if it's a known fact, but I want to say it was Bruce Tharp that gained access to that library when he took over the NWA, or he was in the midst of trying to get a hold of that library when he bought, or however that whole thing went down. And I think that was one of the most sought after video libraries out there, along with the World Class Championship Wrestling library. But and apparently, I guess WWE does not have their hands on it yet. I can only imagine how much that would go for right now.
Well, there were a lot of preliminary discussions between Bruce Tharp and the World Wrestling Entertainment about that library, and the numbers between the two were very, very different. The value that Bruce Tharp put on the library versus the value that the WWE saw in the library. There was quite a gap in terms of what one was willing to pay and what one was willing to accept. The hardest part of that to swallow is that library was supposed to benefit Paul Bosch's widow and their son, who I believe has special needs. So it was kind of sad to hear that something couldn't be worked out for that family. I don't know what's going on with Lightning One versus International Wrestling Corporation. That's how I'm keeping them separated. Lightning One has permission to use that library in some capacity. I don't know what the compensation for that is. I don't know how that all works out. I mean, obviously, if they own the library outright, you probably see a lot more of these, gems from Houston. I mean, they have the library with Harley Race body slamming Andre the Giant. They have so much wrestling in those vaults that if if Billy Corgan had purchased that outright and could use that, at any time, why wouldn't they just flood YouTube every week instead of showing us, the last few championship NWA pay-per-views? Why not just show a few episodes from Houston? I don't think they have the liberty to use it, but there's certainly value to it, and there is certainly some great matches that are in that library. DK, I know you're a little bit older than me. Did you watch any of the Houston library when you were little? I know you didn't grow up in Texas, but did you have any access to that when you were younger?
I saw a couple episodes when I was younger. By the time I was getting into wrestling was about the time that Bosch was already transitioning to work more with Mid-South and then kind of Southwest. And finally, a lot of people who don't understand Texas wrestling history don't know that Fritz Von Erich basically controlled the entire state with the exception of Amarillo. And Bosch and Blanchard in San Antonio booked from his office. And Bosch in particular, this is back when Gary Hart was running what at the time was Big Time Wrestling, before World Class was being used as the name. And so they would book the shows and run the shows. And Bosch basically booked Houston. And that was about it. And he'd bring in wrestlers from all over the country. And then Blanchard and Bosch both left Fritz's booking office, or stopped using Fritz's booking office in '79. And by about '82, both of them were in big financial trouble. And so they continued on for a little while, but they basically were making deals with AWA and other people to try and bring stuff in. Within about 4 or 5 years of leaving, both of them were basically out of the business.
Wow.
Of course,
what would you
temporarily for WWE, and that didn't go well at all.
So what do you think? Why do you have any information or stories you've heard about why they struggle so much financially?
As they were, both of them tried to get a little bit too big, I think. Southwest got the deal with, what was it, USA Network? I can't remember what. And, they went and crowned the undisputed world champion, who was Adrian Adonis, by the way, for those who remember. But the relationship only lasted a few months before WWE got them kicked off because they wanted to be exclusive. Or no, wait a minute, that's wrong. They brought in Southwest because WWE was not drawing the ratings. And so there was originally talk that they may switch from WWE to Southwest with Joe Blanchard. But that didn't work. I think that's when Crockett came in. Crockett got an exclusive agreement. So,
let me interrupt for a second. Could you imagine what world we'd be living in now if the WWE was not exclusive to USA and somebody like Southwest or even the Crockett's ended up with that USA deal and what that meant for the WWE over the years? I mean, it would have changed the entire landscape of professional wrestling.
The big thing is a lot of people don't realize is that when Crockett bought the WWE time slot, paid around $1 million for it, and that's what Vince McMahon used to finance a lot of the first WrestleMania.
Huh.
And WWE and Turner had a very bad relationship because WWE was not living up to their agreement when they took over the time slot. Mm-hmm. And so it's very interesting to think about how life might have changed if, they had gotten canceled or kicked off or, whatever. Oh, well, that being said, the Houston Library was a good show. I mean, I mean, that's kind of the wrestling I grew up on, so I really enjoy seeing that stuff.
Yeah, it's interesting that you bring up what might have happened had this, that, or the other. But in the long run, when you look back at why WWE has done so well compared to other wrestling companies over the long period, most people would probably agree with me that it definitely is not their in-ring work. Not that they haven't had great matches over the years, over the last, I guess we're looking at 40 years. But I think what WWE did better than everybody else was their production value, the way they ran their company and the way they ran their business, I think was the biggest, and still probably even to this day, is the biggest hurdle I would say that all other wrestling companies struggle with. Because when you talk about the pains and problems that all of the territory wrestling companies had, most of them weren't that they had bad in-ring quality. I'll put world-class wrestling up against anybody. I used to love what they would do in the ring, and WWE wasn't always, to me, best in the ring. But when you look at the infrastructure, the way the company is run as a business, I think that is what caused WWE to excel beyond the other wrestling companies, is more about what happened behind the camera that affected what happened on the camera. And you may not agree with all of that, but there's probably a big majority of that to agree with.
There is no doubt that Vince McMahon, as a businessman, knew what to do to go national. Because up until that time, nobody really wanted to go national. And he also picked a good time in that a lot of the territories were being run by old men who had made their money. And when things started going down, they kind of said, I got my money.
Yeah.
I can, I can give this up now. And what Vince knew was marketing, and he knew the importance of marketing. And, they once said, when he and Jim Crockett were competing against each other, Crockett had like a 1.5 person marketing department, marketing department or people or whatever. Vince had a full scale marketing business thing going. Yep. And he knew what he was doing. The other thing was, he was, not to steal from another current wrestling promotion, but he was willing to go all in that he put a lot of money into that first WrestleMania.
Yeah.
He put a lot of money into that first WrestleMania. And there are rumors that nobody knows for sure, but there are basically rumors that if the first WrestleMania would have failed, he would have gone broke.
Right.
And so I don't know if it was that extreme, but they would have heard a lot. He was paying for TV time, and that probably would have stopped.
Jay, what kind of wrestling did you watch growing up? What was your formidable years in wrestling?
So I grew up in the West Coast in SoCal, Southern California, and out here, if you didn't have cable, you didn't have access to the NWA. If you didn't have, ESPN, you weren't watching, wrestling from the Sportatorium, whether it be World Class or what was it, Global. You didn't see any of that. You didn't have ESPN. You didn't see those matches from the AWA. So we really only had, Sunday superstars or Saturday morning superstars from the WWE, and then the Sunday equivalent, whatever that was. And we had Glow. I mean, that was it. And then the introduction to the NWA came kind of as, the whole industry change, where we had cable kind of filling into the markets. Now, I'm in that circle that was just a little bit too young for the LaBelles and the Championship Wrestling from Hollywood, the original that came from the Grand Olympic Auditorium. That was the NWA affiliate. We had, Tolos and Freddie Blassie with Blood Feuds. We had Chavo Guerrero Sr. and Roddy Piper feuding over the NWA light heavyweight championship. I missed all that stuff. I was born maybe 3 or 4 years too late, and it was all pretty much done by the time I was getting into wrestling. So all I had was what Vince was feeding me until about, I want to say 89, when we started getting cable, maybe actually probably 87 when we started getting cable. And then I was introduced to TBS on Saturday nights. And on West Coast time, it came on at 3:05. So, it would say 6:05, and you'd go to tune in to TBS at 6 o'clock, and there was no wrestling. You're watching a Braves game. Finally, 8 or 9 year old Jason figured out time zones. Is like, oh, I need to watch this in the afternoon, not towards dinner time. And so I grew up mostly on the WWF. Like I said, used to watch Glow, American Gladiators. That was kind of our package. And then we jump on to Saturday nights years later. And I remember as we were growing up, we would watch, all the WWF programming. We'd get the pay-per-views. We didn't get WrestleMania 1 in my house, but I think we had a steady of WrestleManias from like WrestleMania 2 till probably about 10 or 11, where we saw every single one of those. We would get the Survivor Series, but then we would also get Starrcade, and we would watch those pay-per-views as well, what the NWA was doing. And we've mentioned on the show before, my mom hated Ric Flair with a passion, loved Lex Luger, loved Sting, and would throw a fit every time the Horseman would come in and interfere on behalf of Flair, keeping Sting from the title or Flair from the title. Mama Cow would come out and say, expletive this, expletive that. We're not watching these pay-per-views anymore. They keep screwing over Lex Luger. That's it. We're done. And then the next pay-per-view that comes out, Sting gets his chance. We're like, hey, Mom, Sting's got an opportunity to take the belt from Flair. What do you think? Okay. But if those Horsemen get involved again, we're done. We're not getting it anymore. But every month, we'd keep coming back to it. And I, as a kid, I don't want to say I was spoiled, but I never went without a need and had most of my wants taken care of. I don't know what kind of budget my parents had for wrestling, but for a kid who never went to a wrestling show until much, much later in life, I saw hundreds of hours of television wrestling growing up, be it, Superstars or All American Wrestling or Saturday night, the pay-per-views, the clashes, everything. I mean, we never missed wrestling in my home. So not the nostalgic NWA that you guys had, where World Class or Houston or any of that fun stuff, but I got to see a lot of what was popular on TBS.
So we talked a lot about what we've gotten to see in terms of reminiscing for back in the day. But if you guys don't mind, I would like to segue into probably what the meat or the majority of this conversation is going to be about. And that's the state of professional wrestling today. I don't even know how to quantify or verbalize what a strange Twilight Zone world the professional wrestling has gone into. I will say this, that it's nice to have a product because so many other sports right now are shut down. It's almost like wrestling is the only thing putting any kind of live or somewhat live entertainment out there. What do you guys think? I mean, I'll reserve my opinion because I just want to hear what you guys think, what you've taken away from what's going on in the wrestling world today.
DK, why don't you start?
Well, it's very interesting when we talk about today in this current climate. We don't like to say the virus name because you can get in trouble on YouTube. But I think one thing is that some of these empty arena things that we've been watching, they've actually had to focus some on the in-ring work, which has been good. That's been a positive. Some wrestlers are still playing to the non-existent crowd. That's bad. But I think we're seeing some more solid ring work than we've been used to. I did not watch WrestleMania. I do not have the network, and I wasn't going to shell out the money for a pay-per-view that I didn't know how it was going to be. But I've heard that Charlotte Flair and Rhea Ripley had just a classic match. Apparently, Kevin saw it. And then I also have heard about, the Undertaker and AJ Styles, their cinematographic match, which I guess if you like movies like Fight Club or some of the fight movies that are out there, you'd probably enjoy this, because that's the way it was presented. I guess the Firefly Funhouse match was of a similar vein. Kevin, if you watched them, you'll have to tell us what they were was bad. Okay, you'll have to explain to us how they were and how they were different and everything like that. So I'm a little worried now that we're going to get even more ridiculous on some things. AEW had to quickly explain how Matt Hardy teleported through a empty stadium, because even their fans found that to be a bit on the ridiculous side. And their answer wasn't much better. For those who don't know, apparently they were video holograms from his drone. And I mean, for those who don't really realize, Vince McMahon is not really a big fan of the wrestling business. He wants to be in the entertainment business.
Sure.
And so people who follow that type of wrestling, and not as many as there used to be, but they're still the ones that are the big dogs. So you got to give them their due that way. They're going to be very flashy, very entertainment based. The plus of this virus has been they've had to focus on in-ring work, much like NXT.
Said the V word.
Oh, sorry. So, see, you don't even know what you're saying half the time. But that being said, I feel bad for a lot of the independent wrestlers. Not so much independent promoters. They basically put money up show to show. And so, to be honest, a lot of them lose money. So this is almost probably like a break for them to replenish some of their funding mechanisms if they, with their real jobs, so to speak. But some of the independent wrestlers who really travel and have really used this income to help support their families, I'm feeling really bad for them. I mean, when Kevin speaks, I'm sure he'll speak more to, having suffered through injuries and stuff like that has caused him to lose time in the business. He can probably explain more what that's like. I don't know, Jay, what are your thoughts?
So all three of us were alive and cognitive during September 11th. And we all remember the fear. We all remember the resiliency. We all remember the unity that came from that horrible, horrible incident. People were terrified. I remember I worked retail at the time, and our retail establishment stayed open, did a moment of silence, and was very cautious throughout the entire day. I remember I was in school at the time, junior college, and classes were canceled. There were no fly zones. It was really, really scary, but not unlike how it is right now. However, that lasted all of about a week. And in fact, there were wrestling shows happening that weekend following September 11th. And in some ways that was great, because that was the right thing to do. It felt like we were showing anyone who felt like the Americans would be scared that we weren't. And I thought that was really cool. This is much different. This is the entire world is fighting for its collective life. You know, and I don't mean to perpetuate you know, I don't mean to perpetuate fear or scare anybody, but this is different than anything we've felt before as a world, as a global community, and it's impacted every single aspect of life. So with that being said, yes, everything's coming to a halt, grinding halt. And it amazes me that wrestling promotions are still even putting on some shows now. And that includes WWE, that includes AEW, and all of the offshoots, NXT, SmackDown, Raw, whatever you want to talk about. It surprises me that they're still finding ways to produce content. And I mean, we just recently heard Roman Reigns, who pulled out of WrestleMania because there were scares. You know, The Miz was sick, and he couldn't risk the jeopardizing himself for his family or his family. And then also, you know, he's said now, I guess publicly, that he won't return to the WWE until the COVID-19 pandemic is more contained. And again, no one can fault him for that. But the rest of the world is sitting here on hold trying to figure things out. WWE is pushing forward, AEW is pushing forward, and of course, promotions that we normally talk about on this show, like Championship Wrestling from Hollywood, or more importantly, the National Wrestling Alliance, they're frozen. They can't do anything. Now, fortunately for some of these talents, guys who have deals with the NWA, they're being compensated. You know, that was told to me directly by Royce Isaacs. You can listen to the interview that we did just a few days ago on the podcast. You could also hear directly from Dave Lagana, who mentions it on Twitter from time to time, that, you know, the NWA talent's being taken care of. The 9-to-5 indie wrestlers who don't have deals in place, they're struggling. And that's scary because a lot of people are going to lose their jobs. There are people who are going to lose their homes. There are people who are, you know, WrestleMania weekend in particular, so many different wrestling promotions were set to run the biggest show of the year that weekend and had to cancel, had to stop running those events. And it certainly, I think, is going to be a death knell for many wrestling promotions out there, a financial loss that they're not going to be able to recover from. That's not necessarily the worst thing in the world in terms of wrestling, because cream always finds a way to rise. And I do believe that we are going to get some sort of revolution when it comes to pro wrestling. We're going to see a new way of things being done. We're going to see the best promotions are going to be forced to be even better, because wrestling was firing on all cylinders up until this point, in my opinion. I mean, you had so much competition out there. You had so much good wrestling, not just, that's okay. That's okay. There was good wrestling in more than one avenue. You know, we talk about the NWA. We talk about how good NWA Power was, and how much the three of us enjoyed that show. But there was great wrestling going on outside of the NWA as well. Some of those promotions aren't going to come back. They just won't. Some of those promotions are going to be forced to be better than they were before. So you're right. I believe that this is hurting wrestling today, but I think in the long run, people are going to grow from it. Talent that has been wrestling, first of all, they're getting a chance to focus on the recreative process, right? Focusing on themselves, focusing on their health, focusing on getting healthy, focusing on conditioning, focusing on how are we going to get back to it. So I think we're going to see a lot more creative wrestling in the future. And then, of course, these empty arenas, I mean, they're kind of paying homage to what Crockett was doing in the arenas. You know, these not arenas, excuse me, but these studio wrestling shows. You know, they're wrestling at the performance center. There's literally nobody in the audience, but they're going back to basics, back to the basics of TV wrestling. So we're seeing that now from AEW. We're seeing that from WWE. It's stuff the NWA has been doing for the last year. And I think that's going to give people a lot of good ideas going forward. So without dragging out my thoughts too much longer, I really think that we're going to see a different kind of wrestling return. I mean, we're always going to have WWE. I don't think that's going anywhere. We're going to have AEW because they have good financial partners with the Cons and TNT and all that good stuff. But I think what we're going to see is a lot of these smaller wrestling promotions are going to have to push themselves to that next level, because again, if this all subsides by June or by August or by September, the first thing everyone's going to want to do is get out of the house and go get entertainment. They're going to want to go watch the movies. They're going to go want to watch live sporting events. And if wrestling can capitalize on that demand for people just being out and being in a community, I think that's really going to help grow wrestling in this country. I really think we might be looking at another, uh, a rebirth of professional wrestling in this country.
So I guess it's my turn.
It is your turn, Mr. Douglas.
So one of the things that I felt that professional wrestling in this current, before all this went down, was lacking was the ability to tell a story. One of the things I liked a lot about the NWA, especially as a studio, was that they made a conscious effort to like really tell a story. And one of the things I've noticed that has separated the good from the bad, from the really ugly in the current climate as it stands, is the wrestler's abilities to tell a story. And another thing is that wrestling Twitter, especially, or just wrestling social media, nobody was happy. As good as wrestling was going, nobody was happy at the time. Everybody complained about WWE or complained about AEW. And I think at this point, I think maybe people might start, I'd like to see them maybe back away a little bit and realize, like you were saying, Jay, how good we really had it as fans. I've never seen wrestling like it was. So I think wrestling, in terms, always compare wrestling to eras, and I feel like this is the athletic, move as many moves as you can, as many flips as you can do era. And I think that doesn't translate well without a huge crowd response. And so over the WrestleMania weekend, I labored myself to watch it, because I wanted to see, like, what is the top company with the most resources? What are they gonna do? And like, I think DK was the one that brought up the Charlotte and Rhea match. And it easily, as far as I was concerned, it was easily the best match of the weekend. And the reason it was because every other match felt like going through the motions. Felt like, oh, well, we don't have a crowd here. We don't have what we normally have. So we're just going to go out there. What's our time limit? 12 minutes. Okay, we're just going to mail it in, go out for 12 minutes, do what we got to do for 12 minutes and get through this, because we just got to get through this. But what I saw from Charlotte and Rio was the realization that this is still WrestleMania. This is still, we are the only people right now able, really, aside from AEW, to do what we get to do in front of people, even on television. And I felt like, as a fan, that they actually appreciated my time and my money. The other match, as I was watching it, that did nothing for me for probably 8 or 9 minutes, was Randy Orton and Edge. And I remember telling my wife as I'm watching, I'm like, oh my gosh, like, could they please just tell a story? You guys are just beating each other up and walking through hallways and beating each other up. And I don't know if they heard me through the camera or what, but as I told her, I was like, I'm about to fast forward this because I can't take it. And then it's almost immediately as I'm thinking that, Randy Orton actually plays to the camera, makes a facial expression, gets not in the camera's face like this, but like, oh wait, there's a camera here. I'm gonna play to that. And then as the match unfolded, and again, I'm not a big fan of Edge. I do like Randy Orton a lot, but the match actually felt like I was watching a story being told. I saw things unfolding. I felt like there was a playing to the camera differently than what we see from the matches that are just going through the motion matches. And I think you lose a lot of the effect, and this is probably like a technical thing, but you lose a lot of the effect of the hard camera. You know what I mean? Like, with this type of wrestling. So the attention to the roaming cameras, and not just like as a wrestler, not just like playing to the camera, but if the camera's right next to you, to make a conscious effort to know it's there and realize that all the fans and all the people are in that little camera hole right there. They're not here in in the arena. I think that the more the wrestlers start to be cognizant of that, um, hopefully they already are aware of it. I think that's why the Undertaker and AJ Styles match got such a big, um, such a good response, was because it was a story. It wasn't the greatest story ever told, DK, but it was a story. They were actually like trying to tell you a story, as were some of these other matches, like the ladder match or the tag matches or the one-on-one matches. It just felt like, kind of like what we see sometimes in these matches on TV, where, if they don't get a ooh, ah, woo, like, they might as well not be out there. There's no gripping emotion that comes from working the camera and telling a story. And so I would hope that as we go along, that we can see the telling of the story become something a little bit more prominent. Did we lose Jay?
I think you had to do a quick errand, so we'll keep going.
Fair enough. Family first.
I have a question for you, as somebody who has been in the business. I've heard a lot of people say that you could tell a difference between people who came up in the indie system, who might be used to performing before crowds of somewhere between, 10 and 100 people or something like that, and those who were brought up in the WWE system, who, were taught to perform more than taught to tell a story, so to speak.
Sure.
Did you notice this? Did you notice people like Daniel Bryan or any of them that kind of came through an indie system, or somebody like Charlotte Flair, of course, watched her dad throughout the thing and just got so much natural talent. I mean, could you tell a difference between WWE homegrown versus some that kind of came from outside WWE?
Well, I'm glad you asked that, because there are a few people that shone through to me. And I wish I could say it has to do with that. But, the match I was looking forward to the most, because I thought if anybody's going to get it, it's going to be these two guys. And that was Sami Zayn and Daniel Bryan. And they were the most guilty, I felt like, of anybody all weekend of wrestling a match like there was a crowd there. Instead of, DK, if this is what we got, Sami Zayn, we got Daniel Bryan, two of the best, I would say, when I say technical wrestling, I don't mean like catch as catch can wrestling. I mean doing the business of pro wrestling, telling a story, executing moves, timing, like knowing their environment and actually maximizing that environment. Those are the two guys I thought for sure would get it. And they had the worst match, I felt like. And again, maybe there were other matches over the weekend that were better, and I mean that weren't as good. Maybe they still had a good match, but considering who we're talking about Daniel Bryan and Sami Zayn, two guys that can go in there, literally lock up, headlock, arm drag, just do wrestling moves, tell a good story, but not an over elaborate story. And that right there is all we need to see. But instead, you had tons of outside interference. You had Sami Zayn running around the ring 3/4 of the match. And you just go, look, guys, this is not Monday Night Raw. This is WrestleMania. Like, get out there. I don't know if you ever got to watch. If you haven't, you owe it to yourself. Watch Sami Zayn and Shinsuke Nakamura right before Sami Zayn left NXT. One of the best professional wrestling matches of the modern era, as far as I'm concerned. And again, it was because it was like so emotional. It was so like hard fought. It felt like you were watching a moment. And I thought for sure him and Daniel Bryan could recreate this. And I found it really ironic that guys like Edge, Randy Orton, Charlotte Flair, Rhea Ripley, those were the people to me that shined the most. Undertaker, AJ Styles. I thought those were the best matches of the weekend. And it all was because they didn't try to do a bunch of wrestling moves. They didn't oversell. They sold when they needed to. But again, it looks really silly when you're overtly verbal in an environment that's very quiet. So it doesn't match up. And so again, I'm just getting down to like more of the nuts and bolts. That's what made Rhea Ripley and Charlotte Flair's match so good, was that of all the in-ring matches, that was the best one because they told a story and it felt like you were watching a WrestleMania match. Like you didn't feel like you were watching, you know, a Saturday Superstars match. The rest of them felt like they weren't really wrestling at WrestleMania. So I don't think coming from the indies or not made a difference, because the guys you would have expected to do the best, I thought dropped the ball the most.
Let's do two compare and contrast, since you're the one that saw it. And this is based on, again, stuff I've read or stuff I've heard. Again, I will say I did not watch WrestleMania, so I do not know. But let's do two compare and contrast. Let's do Charlotte and Rhea versus the Owens and Rollins match, which I heard was a little bit goofy, obviously edited, didn't make a lot of sense. So you can tell me if that is right or wrong. And then, of course, the two big cinematographic matches.
Sure.
The Boneyard match and the Firefly Funhouse. So if you can do those two compares, because those we have two wrestling matches, two cinematographic matches.
Well, okay,
People
it's easy.
like one and not like the other on both of them. So
Right.
tell me your thoughts.
Jay, did you catch any of the WrestleMania weekend?
No. It's kind of funny. Someone recently reached out to me because they know I'm a big wrestling fan. They're like, "What'd you think of WrestleMania?" I was like, "Yeah, watch it." And they were like, they were shocked. They're like, "Wait, you're a wrestling fan, right?" I'm like, "Yeah, but I tend to watch the little guys, and that's kind of hard to explain to people who don't know what wrestling is or don't really understand it." They're like, "What do you mean the little guys?" My wife used to use the best comparison. She said, "My husband covers wrestling for like the minor leagues," and then
Right.
they're like baseball. I go, "Yeah, yeah," and she, her really only idea was the NWA. So she would say, yeah, the NWA, it's like the minor leagues. The guys from the NWA go on to bigger and better things after the NWA, which is true in a lot of cases and not true in some cases. But long story short, no, I didn't catch WrestleMania. I heard a lot of the same comparison you guys are making. A lot of people were very excited with the Undertaker and AJ Styles match. But the way people described it to me, it sounded like Lucha Underground.
Sure.
And then I heard lots of great things about Charlotte and Rhea, but I didn't see it. So yeah, I guess I don't have a dog to pull in this race.
Well, I think again, when we talk about the state of wrestling today, I don't watch a lot of AEW. I think you're looking at the two companies that all the little guys want to work for. When you're talking about AEW, WWE, and again, I say all the little guys. I know there are a lot of independent wrestlers who have no goals in those areas. I was one of those guys for a long time. But I'm saying the majority of wrestlers are looking to make a living at wrestling at the highest income level possible. And typically those are going to be the two companies in New Japan Wrestling that's going to provide that. Now, Devin, as far as your question, so the reason Rhea Ripley, and this is easy, I can sum this up in a quick sentence. The reason the Ripley Charlotte match, and I'll sound like a broken record, and the Seth Rollins Kevin Owens matches were so drastically different was Kevin Owens and Seth Rollins mailed it in. Period. They did not. You didn't feel watching the match like either one of them cared if they won or not. And Seth Rollins' current character rendition, it feels cheap. I don't know what you want to call it, but I don't like it. I've seen Kevin Owens do a lot better job at telling a story than he does in this. But the big thing is this WrestleMania, you felt like one match meant something. You felt like the other match was like, oh, these guys don't really care, and they're ready to get out of here. That was the big difference between the two. And as far as the Funhouse Firefly match and the Undertaker match, I didn't watch the Firefly House thing. I fast forwarded it because I felt like it was the polar opposite of what the Boneyard match was. Was one match, we're watching pro wrestling. We know what we're watching. I always tell people when they come up to me, they're like, oh, well, wrestling's choreographed or wrestling's fake. And I say, you know who you sound like? And they'll be like, who? I said, you're the guy, you sound like a person, you go to a movie, and you go, look, Thor, look, what's his name? The guy that plays Thor?
Chris Hemsworth.
Chris Hemsworth's really not Thor. Look, oh, he didn't really hit him. And you gotta look at him and go, no one talks about that. Like, you're having a conversation that no one really is having when you're talking about choreography or wrestling or any of that kind of stuff. But there is an element to wrestling that is very dangerous, very costly to the individual on their body and their emotion and their time spent. And I felt like when I watched The Undertaker versus AJ Styles, I mean, The Undertaker busts a window and cuts his arm open. You know, like, you knew they had to like stop the whole thing and go like make sure he didn't hit a major artery because he cut himself on the window busting. You know, like, you had guys doing real stunts, falling off of buildings and explosions and fire. I mean, you knew that like that those guys had something on the line when they were doing it. You knew they weren't, you know, there were sound effects, there were lighting effects, there was stuff that you would see in a movie, but at the core of it, it was still a wrestling match. You still had the same psychology you would see in a wrestling match. You still had a lot of the same, you know, it felt like, again, there was, you know, one of my favorite things about good matches is like foreshadowing. You know, like something will happen early and then later on in the match it'll mean something. That's telling a story. They did a lot of that. And so I felt like when you watched that, it was really telling a story. I felt like by the time you got 3/4 of the way in, you were somewhat emotionally invested. And the payoff at the end was, I would say, traditional or picture perfect Undertaker. And so all in all, I mean, as a fan, I'm not a big fan of Undertaker. I'm a big AJ Styles fan. But as a fan, you kind of got what you came for. The Funhouse match, what I watched in the Funhouse match was really just a bunch of goofiness and really the making fun of the character of Bray Wyatt, who was a champion 2 months ago and now is a laughing stock. He was a laughing stock and his character was a laughing stock the whole time to me anyways, because I like production as much as anybody, but overproduction is still overproduction, and he was overproduced. And I felt like John Cena's playing into it only made it worse. And so I fast forwarded it, didn't watch it, had nothing for it. Again, in the end, I want to see a fight. And with The Undertaker and AJ Styles, you knew there was physicality happening in the match, which makes it mean something. There was a story told. So one told a good story that you'd want to see in a wrestling match. The other, it just was like, it was like Toxic Avenger, or, you know, like, I don't know, you know, it wasn't something I'm going to ever take seriously. And it's just not something I'm a big fan of. So hopefully that explains the differences and why I felt like, because I felt like the Edge, and sorry to go on, but I felt like Edge and Randy Orton was a lot closer live, if it was live, quote unquote, to The Undertaker and AJ Styles. You had a lot of panning to the roaming cameras. You had a lot of real up close stuff. So you had a lot more like physical contact that felt like it was in your face. I think a lot of the matches were missing that. It felt like they were so distant from the camera, as when you're watching Randy Orton and Edge, like if you didn't feel yourself almost crying at the end, like you weren't watching it. It was really that they really did that good of a job. 3/4 of the match wasn't good. I won't lie on that, but once they, I think, figured out what they were actually doing, it was good. And I think if they can play off of this going forward and use the things that were good about WrestleMania going forward in their production, and other wrestling companies as well can find these kind of these little hidden gems, we can get back to storytelling, and we can come back to the wrestling where you have great storytelling and great athleticism with selling and the things that have kind of been lost in today's day and age that you have to have in this type of wrestling that we have right now. Done.
Well, one thing I want to point out, just so people understand, because I don't know how many people out there have watched WrestleMania or not, but the Firefly Funhouse match had no wrestling.
None.
It was basically a trip through Bray Wyatt's shattered mind. The only thing that happened, I guess, in a ring was John Cena standing there emotionally drained from the trip through Bray Wyatt's mind. He gets the mandible claw by the Fiend, and the pin is counted by Bray Wyatt. So again, the whole question is, was there ever really even anything, or was it just a movie that was made to show what was happening in Bray Wyatt's mind? The Fiend, though, brings me back to another thought just in wrestling in general. We'll leave WrestleMania for a second in wrestling in general. And we'll start with you, Jay. I'm kind of curious. One of the things I've never liked in wrestling is the unbeatable monster. Because the unbeatable monster suddenly becomes very beatable, a couple of years later. We see it the Big Show start as the Giant and WCW, they fall off buildings and they come back. The Fiend, nothing seems to hurt them. We've seen plenty of unbeatable monsters. Braun Strowman was even this way. And now he's lost Sami Zayn. What's your feeling in general? I mean, with the exception of Andre the Giant, who was very well protected throughout his career because he was able to go so many different places. And he didn't have to lose because he'd always go somewhere and be the special attraction. What are your thoughts when promoters start putting out the newest unbeatable monsters?
So, wrestling's always been supposed to be over the top. It's supposed to be dramatic. It's supposed to have flair. It's supposed to be, they used to call it the king of sports. The problem with wrestling is the whole suspension of belief, right? We all have to get to a point where we're like, okay, look, this is going to be fantasy. So we get Undertaker, who had this amazing 20-0 streak at WrestleMania. No matter how many matches he won or lost after that, he won 20 matches a row at WrestleMania, and that was a huge deal. But at the end of the day, he's still just a human being. And for all that time, we've kind of suspended belief. Like, no, he's supernatural. See the lightning striking from the ground, It's a bit much. But that's part of our job as a fan of wrestling is to suspend belief, right? It's to let this be a show. Let this enjoy the show, right? When you bring in guys, over the years, right? Hulk Hogan was the best at this. He was bigger than everything. And when they would bring in wrestlers, he would come in and crush them. So it didn't matter if it was Kamala or Big John Studd or King Kong Bundy or Andre the Giant. At the end of the day, Hulk Hogan was going to body slam whoever was put in front of him. And so the story of big men in professional wrestling, there's only one place to go. I mean, you can't really, nobody can be undefeated forever. Nobody can stay a monster forever because the storytelling doesn't give credence to that. And especially when you got, somebody like Kane, who was supposed to be this killing machine, and then all of a sudden they soften him up and they put him with Sean Waltman, and they're like a quasi DX, and the whole Katie Vick with Triple H. They destroyed whatever nostalgic, not nostalgic, but mystique that the character had. And to your point, when you brought up Big Show and how him and Hogan did the monster truck on top of a building, and Big Show fell off, but he was wrestling later in the night. I mean, again, it's our job as wrestling fans to suspend this belief. But at the end of the day, I mean, it is.
They have to make it possible to suspend our belief.
Right. Did you believe that Big Show fell off the building in a monster truck? I didn't. And I don't believe that happened. And I don't believe that Hulk Hogan walked into the Dungeon of Doom and the Zodiac Man and the Shark and Kevin Sullivan and all of his minions were attacking Hogan prior to the NWO. I didn't really believe that Jake the Snake betrayed the Ultimate Warrior and stuffed him in a coffin. I don't believe Papa Shango made Ultimate Warrior throw up at ringside, but that's part of the show. So, we were talking about the Boneyard match, and I said how that reminded me of Lucha Underground, because it did. It 100% was from what I've heard. Huh?
I've been told that's what it was styled after.
Yeah, I think I heard a rumor that can't remember the guy's last name, but Chris something or other, who was at Lucha Underground, who before that worked with the WWE, actually helped set that match up. And Lucha Underground had a huge audience. They had a lot of people who were involved in that show, but to traditional wrestling fans, were like, well, wait a minute, that's not wrestling. That's soap opera. That's storytelling. But to Kevin's point, if you don't have a good story, then all the wrestling in the world doesn't make it work. So there's got to be that fine line, and I think that's the problem of finding that the believability versus the storytelling. And I don't know that anyone's done that super well. I mean, again, maybe Undertaker might be the best example. What was that?
I'm sorry. I said not for a long time. Let me insert one little thing here.
Sure.
Then we probably need to wrap up because we've been going for a while.
Yeah.
But and Kevin can probably relate to this really well. I've always understood the that wrestling was an exhibition. All right.
There you go.
Right? And I mean, I've always known that from the time I was little. My dad never hid it from me. He never had, told me that, oh yeah, everything that's going on is 100% real. So I've always known. But during the Von Erich Freebird feud, I mean, I knew wrestling wasn't quote unquote real, but I thought those two groups didn't like each other. I mean, in the real world, if you told me they were good friends who hung out together outside the ring, I would have said, no, man, they don't like each other. Not happening in the ring is not real, but I know they really don't like each other. And to me, that's something that there's a reason. I miss wrestlers moving through the crowd too, but there was a reason they used to have police protect the heels and protect the faces from the girls trying to kiss them, and everything like that. I mean, you look back at 1983, 84 World Class, there are more girls in the audience than there are guys, because the girls are after the Freebirds, Chris Adams, Gino Hernandez, all the sexier young wrestlers. And so, to me, there was a balance there in that even though I knew what wrestling was, I was still worked to a point that I didn't think Jimmy Garvin and David Von Erich were friends.
Right.
I didn't. And, they never took pictures and posted them on Twitter saying, hey, that was a great match we just had. Yes, I know Twitter wasn't around, but you get my point that there's a balance between suspending my belief for the sake of it being wrestling and them putting on a thing that makes me go, okay, yeah, I know what's going on in the ring is an exhibition, but no, these people really don't like each other. And Kevin, did you feel that way?
Well, I think, and again, I guess I'm a modern wrestling apologist, because I really do love a lot of things about wrestling as it is today. And what I've learned, and of course I watch historic wrestling. Yesterday I was watching WrestleMania 2. I mean, I watch old wrestling, always have. It was just bred into me when I was a kid, but it was also bred into me as a wrestler when I was being trained by Rodney, that, you need to know where you come from. And what I've learned watching old wrestling and even now is that if everybody could be great at it, if everybody could do it awesome all the time, they really would. Like, every wrestler wants to be the next, if you say Andre the Giant or Dynamite Kid or Hulk Hogan or, Bret the Hitman Hart or Shawn Michaels, or you can keep going into the modern era from the Stone Colds to the Brock Lesnar's to the Rock or John Cena's. You know, every wrestler wants to be that guy or the guy. And I just think it takes it being the right place at the right time, having the right message that connects to the fans the right way. Because if you go back and you watch, I know that, you know, Devin likes NXT, but if you go back and watch Tommaso Ciampa's heel turn with Johnny Gargano, it was still one of the best little runs in wrestling I've ever seen, especially in a day and age where you don't have heels. But I think, and this is just a wrap kind of where I'm at with this and bring it around to the NWA, because that's why we do this show. And that's what our common thread here is. And we've talked a lot about a lot of everything, but we haven't talked a lot about the NWA. What I do think is that the NWA was already on the studio wrestling thing. I think studio wrestling is going to become a bigger thing as we go forward, especially over the next year or so, when maybe congregating in larger crowds may not be something we're allowed to do. I think the NWA has a head start on this. And I think we may be in an era of wrestling where it's not always about how big of a crowd you draw, but how good of a show you put on in front of the camera and how well you do in front of the crowd that you do have, and how you play to the people on the other side of the camera. I think it's more important now than maybe it ever has been. Maybe the last time it was this important was during the territory days when you did have a lot of studio matches that would promote towards these larger matches. But I don't think in the near future we're going to have a lot of huge matches. I just can't see that happening. I think the NWA will be one of the very first wrestling companies, if not in the near future, like sooner than most, to open their doors in terms of bringing the wrestlers back into locker rooms, making sure the guys that they have are all clean and clear, and then putting a wrestling match on in front of a studio audience or in front of, you know, I said on Twitter, you know, like, why not put you, when I tried out for ECW, the wrestlers would actually cheer or boo you based on how good they thought you were doing. And that was how you actually got a job there, was how you, if you could pop the boys. And that was a big thing. Like it was the most nerve-wracking thing in my life, having like RVD and Sandman and Tommy Dreamer, like watching me wrestle, you know, like, oh my God, like I'd rather wrestle in front of nobody than that. But I think at some point there's a way, and I think WWE has the resources to do it. But I also think places like NWA, the current NWA Power, has already been doing these matches. They already have this going. You know, I think they just have to be able to learn how to, I guess you would say, mitigate or control how many people are in the audience, how far they are away from each other, or whatever when we get to go back to being out in public, whatever the restrictions are, it's going to play to companies like MLW and NWA and WWE and AEW. Those companies are going to do fine. But I think some of the other smaller companies that know how to run a good studio show, that have production like NWA, I think it's a huge opportunity for the National Wrestling Alliance to put itself kind of up there with the other wrestling companies. And some of the things that we had talked about, what they need and what every wrestling company right now needs is 1, 2, 3, 4 wrestlers, girl, guy, whatever, to really start to like put their hand, you see my hand? There we go. Put their hand on the pulse of what the people want to see and learn how to put it through the camera so that we can really enjoy it as fans. When they figure that thing out, it's not going to matter if they're in front of 100 people or 100,000 people.
Well, I think the NWA is in a good place in that they have the opportunity. Most people think that we'll probably get back together in smaller crowds before bigger crowds. You know, they'll start allowing like church service type gatherings and stuff like that. And so it's something that would put the NWA kind of on the same level as WWE, AEW, any of them. It's, you know, it's like, we're only allowing 100 people. Okay, well here we'll put our wrestling in front of 100 people up against anybody wrestling against 100 people. And look, the NWA's got a lot of fine talent. Don't misconstrue my dislike of some of the things in modern wrestling, so to speak, as disliking modern wrestlers. I mean, Nick Aldis, I've said it before, love him as champion, would like to see him get a good run. I don't need a hot shot title reign to keep him interesting. I know some people think nowadays, oh, if you don't change the championship, then it gets boring. No, he's a good wrestler. He can put people over without without having to drop the title. Leave it on him. He's got a couple of years that he could still be champion, at least one. And build up a rivalry. We talk about Eli Drake. Build up a rivalry.
Yeah.
They don't have to change the title in 3 matches or 2 or whatever. Let them wrestle for a year. Let them wrestle for a year and a half. Before he finally gets the big victory or whatever. Trevor Murdoch. I love Trevor Murdoch. I love Ricky Starks. If we want to talk about, younger guys. That fungus, Siggy Dice, is still growing on me. He's putting forth effort that I like to see. Outside of the NWA, just to bring up a couple, I know Kevin's a big fan of this guy, Hammerstone. Man, talk about a top prospect.
Man.
I think if he wants to hit the big time, that he'll definitely get his opportunity.
Agreed.
He is excellent in MLW. In fact, I only watch 2 matches in MLW. I watch Hammerstone matches and I watch Von Erich matches. And the Von Erich boys, again, they channel the Von Erichs, even their grandfather to a point. I mean, they're still a little bit green, but they have improved so much even just since their time in MLW. I mean, these guys have what it takes. So I don't want people to think that my dislike of some modern wrestling presentation is a dislike of modern wrestlers. There are guys out there that know how to do it. And if wrestlers go watch the Charlotte Flair Rhea Ripley match, which I'm going to hunt down because I've heard so many good things about it, I'll bet you that they could learn more about professional wrestling in that one match than probably a lot of the things that they've experienced so far. Jay, I'll let you kind of wrap up.
Yeah, take it home, Jay.
Putting all the pressure on me, fellas. Again, this was fun, guys. And I think if you guys are watching at home, you enjoyed this video, make sure you put a thumbs up, like it. Tell us what you like. Tell us what you didn't like. We thrive on criticism and critique. That's how we get better. I really enjoyed this format. I think we'll be doing this going forward, and hopefully we'll be doing a lot more shows like this. Just to put my stamp of approval on this, the topic this week: wrestling is an ever-changing sport. It wasn't the same in the 1980s. It's not the same now. It wasn't the same in the 60s or the 40s. It's ever evolving. And that's great in that we get to see different forms of entertainment. I've said this lots of times, and you guys can agree or disagree, but professional wrestling is ultimately the Baskin Robbins of pro sports because there is a flavor for every single person out there. If you like comedy wrestling, cool, you can find that. Not my cup of tea, but hey, enjoy it. You like death matches? You want to see a lot of blood? Go for it, brother. Enjoy. For me, my wheelhouse is kind of what the NWA is doing right now, and that's where I feel mostly connected to. But if you want to go watch where the big boys play, hey, there is that WWF, there WWE, there is the AEW. There, you want to go see some really stiff wrestling? You want to see guys get their nose broken? Hey, turn on New Japan Pro Wrestling. You're going to see that stuff. There is a flavor for everyone, and nobody's wrong. We had this discussion with Jaden. Kevin's wrong. we had this discussion with Jaden once where I made the point that I thought wrestling was almost as much performance art as it was pro wrestling, and we went back and forth with it. But ultimately, I think wrestling can be enjoyed on different levels by different people in different ways. And nobody's wrong, because we all get to enjoy it how we want to enjoy it. I won't tell anybody that they're wrong who they like or who they want to support. DK will, but I won't. And that's okay too. But ultimately, I think pro wrestling is supposed to be fun. And if you guys are having fun watching it, then you're doing it right. If you're enjoying the show, then you're doing it right. If you're not enjoying it, you can keep looking for something that you can enjoy. So with that, we're going to do this.
Watch us.
Say that again.
No, watch us.
Oh, yeah. Well, you could. Hey, this is 1 hour out of your day. You can spend some time hanging with your boys, the Alliance guys. Again, this is a presentation of Alliance-Wrestling.com, your #1 source for news and information for the National Wrestling Alliance and Championship Wrestling from Hollywood. But I also want to leave us a moment for DKM. If folks want to follow you on the socials, because I know you're socially active, how can they follow you, DKM?
Sounds kind of personal. If you want my views on wrestling and occasionally politics, follow me on Twitter at DKMFWTX. Don't bother with my other socials because that's me being boring.
And Mr. Kevin Frazier, who we affectionately still refer to as Kevin Douglas, how can folks find you on the socials?
Well, you can find me on Twitter at Kevin Lee Frazier, same on Instagram, and you can also find me on Facebook. My Facebook page, Kevin L. Frazier. For professional wrestling content, you can find me on Facebook at the Modern Day Hero Kevin Douglas, or on YouTube, you can find me at Kevin Douglas 247 for wrestling matches. If you want some motivational speaking, that type of thing, you can find me at just Kevin 247. So there's a lot out there. Any follow is good, and I do also have a website, kevinfrazier.org. So just start a blog, give me a look.
Nice. And of course, you can follow us on all social medias at the Alliance Blog. Now that is Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Twitch TV. We've got you on TikTok, Tumblr, Anchor, Spotify. Just look for the Alliance Blog and we'll get you connected to the best content available for the National Wrestling Alliance. For my friends DKM and Kevin Douglas, this is Jay Cal saying we'll see you at the matches. Good night now.